Turn with me in your Bibles to Mark chapter 4. I'm going to get there in a little bit. I want to tell you about when I was growing up. Many of you know I grew up in a ranch in Wyoming, and where my house was, so I'm the fourth generation. There's now 5 generations on that ranch. It's been a long time, in our family a long time. Where my house is, where I grew up, about 120 yards away was my grandma's house, my grandma and grandpa's house. And then, so, like, you know, just a dirt road between those two houses. And, like, you could see it, you know, one from the other. And then in between there was this old house, like a big 2-story house. And it's where my great-grandparents, that was like the first house on the ranch, is where my grandparents had lived. And a lot of times my parents would be like, I need you to run down and get something from Grandma and Grandma's, get some eggs or whatever from Grandma and Grandpa's. And I'm like, okay. But they would always tell me at night. And that wouldn't really be a problem because when I was younger, my brother would say, like, you got nothing worried about. Great-grandma will watch you the whole way. And that would be fine, except great-grandma had been dead for about 60 years. So it freaked me out that great-grandma was watching me. And he would tell me that, and he'd be like, see that window up there? That's where she watches you from. You got nothing to be worried about. And so, like, I'd start walking until I could see that window, and then I was a dead sprint to get to Grandma's house. Because I don't need great-grandma watching me, right? Freaked me out. You guys are like, where were your parents? All these things your brother did. I don't know. I've asked them a lot why they let him do those things to me. A lot of counseling, but I think I'm getting over it. But I would run, and like, I was fast. For an 18-year-old, I was fat. No, I'm just kidding. But when I was little, I'd run. But I remember, like, the worst time was like when they'd send me down for eggs. So I go to Grandma's house. It's dark. We're not talking like around here where it's light all the time. I'm talking it's dark out there. There's no lights. I don't know if you guys know, but there's stars up there. You might never have seen them here in the city. There's a lot of stars up there, a lot of stars. That's all that was out. It'd be dark, right? And they'd send me down to get eggs like at 8 o'clock at night, right? I don't know why. Send me down. And Grandma would put them in my shirt like this, right? She'd put them in my shirt. So I'd have a whole thing of eggs, which is great until you try to sprint with eggs in your shirt. It doesn't work. I mean, I never got there. Like, they'd send extra eggs because they knew I wasn't getting there with all of them. Like, if I needed 2, I was coming back with a half a dozen. She scared the dickens out of me. And it's funny, the last time we were visiting, I walked down. My brother lives there now in that house my grandparents lived. Nobody lives where my great-grandparents live still. It's old and run down. And I was walking down one night to go to visit my brother down there, and I mean, I still just kind of was like, glanced, you know, like I'm not scared. And I walked. But you know, just that thought in your mind. How many of you have ever been scared of something? There is good fear, okay? If you're not scared of snakes, something's wrong with you. Right? Snakes, I have a healthy fear of snakes. I think they all should die. People are like, those are good snakes and bad snakes. No. Snakes were in the Bible. Snakes were the bad guys. Snakes should die, okay? It's what Jesus put inside of us, right? There is a sense of having a healthy sense of fear. But it's amazing when you begin to stop and pay attention to how much fear is used in our everyday life. There was a book came out on Amazon this week called Fear, and it's one of the top sellers. And it's by a guy named Bob Woodward, and he was the Watergate reporter, if you remember back in the day, and he wrote it about the current administration. And it's instilling fear in our hearts. I like listening to conservative radio. I'm the most unpolitical person you know, but I love listening to conservative radio. I don't know why. It just interests me. But their whole ploy is to use fear to get us to act. And it happens on both sides. Republicans and Democrats, we use fear that, if that person gets in office, the apocalypse is coming, right? It's all going to fall apart. Fear is used in everything we do. Fear is used in preaching. Fear is used in every aspect. The fear is all over the place that if you don't have this. And the thing is, like, it used to be the idea of, the monsters under your bed were scary, but now the fears have changed. The fears are the fears of dying. Did you know? They said number 1 fear is public speaking, number 2 is dying, which means people would rather die than speak in public. That blows my mind, right? But the fears we face are so real, it seems like. The fear of dying, the fear of losing control. When I was preparing for this message, I thought, past great-grandma and snakes, I don't really feel like I'm scared of a whole lot. And then I started to think about it, and I thought, I really am. Maybe I'm scared about what you guys think of my sermons. Maybe I'm scared that I'm not going to tell a good toaster story this next one. Maybe I'm scared about the unknown future. Maybe I'm scared about what comes up next. Maybe I'm worried about this or concerned about that. And I begin to kind of stop and think about it. And I was like, oh, man, there are some things. And you know, really, but we kind of get used to those fears that we don't think about them. They're not like that immediate fear, but they're just like these things that come, that we're just these thoughts that pop up that try to create fear in our hearts. So I want to talk a little about that. And I want to take you to a really familiar story this morning in Mark chapter 5. It's interesting because over 80 times in the Bible, God says, don't be afraid, which scares me because I'm like, if he has to say it that often, how many things should we be concerned about here? Isn't it amazing though? I mean, that's a lot of times. Over 80 times he says, don't be afraid, don't be worried, don't be concerned, don't fear not. What that tells me is we're going to face some things that are scary. And the thing I've realized is as you're pushing into the depths of God, you're going to face some things that are scary. The reality is if things don't scare you a little bit, I kind of wonder if you're really pushing in. Because I'm not comfortable. I'm not scared where I'm comfortable. I'm scared where I'm uncomfortable. I'm scared in places I've never been before. I'm scared in scenarios I've never seen. So there has to be, so there is something that God kind of likes, that little bit of like, yeah. But it's when that fear gets uncontrollable. It's when that fear begins to manipulate and take over our lives. So in Mark 4, we know this story. Jesus had been preaching all day, doing miracles, fighting Pharisees, doing what he does. And he's tired, and he says, let's get on the boat and let's go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. We're going to start at verse 35. I'm reading out of the New King James. On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us cross over to the other side. When they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was. And other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they woke him up, and they said to him, Teacher, do you not even care that we are perishing? Then he arose, he rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, Peace be still. And the wind ceased from there, and was a great calm. And he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said to one another, Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him? This is just a cool story. I was on that sea where they were at. Got to go a chance to go there and be on it, and it was calm and nice weather. But the way it's shaped, the way the mountains are around it, when a storm comes in, it comes in a hurry. And it can get crazy. And it literally says in this scripture, it says that that great tempest, the little Greek words mean mega storm. The word there is megalogogogogo. That's the appropriate way to say it, right? It's a mega storm. This was a real thing that was coming down upon them. This was a real storm that was happening. This was really happening, and it was massive. You're talking guys that had been fishing before. You're talking guys that have been on this sea, this lake all their lives. And yet they were concerned about this. They were worried about it. Verse 37, it says, verse 37, let's read it right there. It says, and a great windstorm arose, a mega windstorm. That literally means a hurricane. It was a massive storm. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. There's something I think we kind of miss about this story is this storm was worth being scared of. This was a legitimately bad situation they were in. This was a legitimately messed up time. And I think sometimes as Christians, we kind of get this idea that, like we should be just so full of faith that there should never be, like this, like you're not going to face these situations. But you are going to be in situations where you should be legitimately scared. You have a legitimate reason to be scared. But what we've discovered from this story, that regardless of your reason, regardless of the legitimacy of it, they still were wrong in walking in fear. As a pastor, the hardest things I think sometimes we deal with is when people are going through a situation. They've just been diagnosed with cancer, somebody's dying, whatever situation they're dealing with, and you're talking to them, and it's like, it's real what you're going through. And I don't ever want to downplay the situation you're dealing with. I don't want to ever be like, you just got to be filled with faith and trust Jesus, But at the same time, that was kind of God's answer. Like, yeah, this storm's going to kill you. It could. But why are you afraid? So you are going to deal with some scary situations. You are going to deal with some legitimately messed up situations. But he's saying, hey, I need you to trust me in this. And verse 38 is where it kind of gets what it says. He says, they say to him, they wake him up. And I think it's pretty impressive. Jesus must have been a deep sleeper. Really. Like, if he'd have had kids, they could have cried all night and he would have never heard them. Like, he's on the back of a boat. This is hurricane winds and he's sleeping. And they wake him up, and it's funny because they said, do you not care that we are perishing? Whoa. And that's the thing we struggle with in our fears, is the first thing we say is, don't you care? How come you haven't acted yet? How come you haven't delivered me out of this situation? How come you haven't showed up? See, there's a real tension that lies between a perfect God who's outside of time but with perfect timing, and humans that are inside of time with no patience at all. There's a tension that lies there when God's going, I see the beginning to the end, and we're going, all I see is the waves, and he's going, what are you worried about? And we're going, why don't you care about us? Isn't it amazing? They jump to this not going, why are you sleeping? But they go, why have you lost your ability to love us? Why are we not worth you being awake for? I mean, it's something about those fearful situations that really bring out how you feel about it. It's not just, hey, God, we're kind of spooked up here. You mind waking up? It's going, I thought you loved us. And we get in the same situations. God, why have you let this happen to me? I thought you loved me. I thought you cared about me. Why aren't you showing up? Why haven't you healed me yet? Why haven't you moved? Why'd you let this person die? Why do I have cancer? Da-da-da-da-da-da. Why do you allow it? Why'd you do this to me? Why? Why don't you care about us? When he says perfect love casts out all fear, the first thing we question is his love. When the very thing that should appease our fears is the very thing we question. Don't you love us anymore? I love how soon we forget. I love how when you get in the middle of the craziness, it's suddenly like everything else doesn't matter. I can't tell you how many times God showed up in financial miracles in my life. I mean, showed up like checks in the mail, extra things, just financial things going, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. But it's funny because still when I get in a financial situation, I'm like, oh God, I think this one's going to end me. Honey, sell the place. We're moving out. We're going to get a tent. It's funny how quickly you forget. It's funny how quickly, like when I was talking about in the community, in the Old Testament, they said, tell your children, tell them the stories. Put them in their minds. Help them to remember. They would set stones at different places that would be memorials to what God had done in that place. I think sometimes we need to set some rocks up in some place and go, this was the day God showed up and delivered me. This was the day he set me free. And when you see those things, you remember that's the day he did it. But the problem is we're good on the asking, we're not so good on the testifying. We will ask all day long, but the thankfulness side is like, oh, we got past that one. Woo, moving on. And we should learn to be a church that celebrates. We should be a church that celebrates his glory, that celebrates his goodness. You guys should be, if Facebook was filled with Christians going, man, you should see what God did for me today. You should see what the Lord has done. And bragged upon him. God is good. God is good. So Jesus wakes up. Verse 39, he arose, he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. The translation of that is horrible. Because when I imagine it, it's Jesus going, peace, be still. The literal word there is hush. That's the literal Greek word. Or as I translate it, shut up. Jesus got up and he said, shut up. He wasn't talking to his disciples, he's talking to the sea, talking to the winds. He rebuked it. He said, shut up and sit down. And I thought about that for a moment, and I'm going, you're in a storm. It's windy, it's blowing, the waves are filling your boat. The worst problem you have is not the noise, it's the motion. Yet God says, shut up. He tells it to be quiet. And I'm going, God, I'm not worried about the noise, I'm worried about the motion. I'm not worried about the noise. I'm worried about the motion. And he said to me, he said, in our fears, the problem is not the motion, it's the noise. It's the voices. It's the one saying you're going to die. It's the one saying you're not going to make it through. It's the one saying that this is going to happen. This was your fault. You failed. It's the voices in your head that are the problem with the fear. And so how do you deal with your fear? You tell it to shut up. The motion isn't the problem. The situation isn't the problem. Jesus deals with the situation. He can handle the situation. But somebody needs to go, shut up, fear. Deal with the noise. Deal with the noise. He rebukes it. He says, calm down. Be still. There's a tendency in our hearts that when things are falling apart to get more active. And he tells things to calm down. When you speak to that storm and you tell it to shut up, you're like, my kid is in here. Could you stop using that term? That's horrible. When you tell it to hush, hush yourself. Simmer down now. There needs to be something, a calm will rise up within you. See, the circumstance is going to change. The circumstance is going to do what it's going to do. But I want to walk through it with a confidence of God. I want to walk through it going, this thing isn't going to blow my life out of the water. But here's the thing. It's easy to say, but one of these storms is going to take you. You're going to die. But I want to walk through that storm with a calmness. I want to walk through that storm going, I'm not worried about the noise. All I hear is the Father beckoning me home. All I hear is the voice of Jesus saying, come on. Every storm I walk through, I want there to be no noise but his voice in my ear. I want to hear his word. I want to know what he has to say. Shut up. Calm down. Verse 40, and he said to them, why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? That question right there is amazing. Why are you so fearful? Because we're going to die? Because you're taking a nap? God doesn't ask what you're afraid of. He asks why you're afraid of it. The what of your fears isn't that big of a deal. The why of your fears is the hard issue of what's going on. And he says, why are you afraid? Why are you fearful? And so I began to think about it. I thought, okay, they have legitimate reasons to be scared. Why shouldn't they be afraid? And the first reason they shouldn't be afraid is the very first verse that we read, verse 35. Verse 35 says, on the same day when he didn't even come, he said to them, let's cross over to the other side. When he tells you you're going to the other side, you're going to the other side. That should have been the first reason. When God's called you to do something, it doesn't mean between here and there it's going to be smooth sailing. It just means you're going to get there. So the very first reason they shouldn't have been scared was the fact he told them you're going to the other side. The second reason, because he was in the boat with them. he's a man. If he's going to die, if I'm going to die, he's going to die. We're in the same boat together. You're like, he walks on water. I'm holding on. And I thought about this, and God said, Matt, I'm in the same boat with you. And I said, God, that's cute when you were like physical there, but what does that mean spiritually? What does that mean for today? And he said, Matt, I'm in the same boat with you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, Matt, if you were sick, he says, I've already borne your sicknesses. I'm in the same boat with you. He says, if you are alone and you're scared, he says, I'm already with you, because I said, don't be afraid, don't be dismayed. I'll never leave you. I'm with you. Where I go, he goes. He's in the boat with me. He's in the boat with you. It's amazing when we get in these fearful situations, we start to imagine that we're the only one in the boat. We start to think we're the only boat in the universe. That one, it said there were boats that went out with them. Jim said that the other night when I was talking about it. He's like, did you know there was a lot of other boats on that sea? But you start to imagine you're the only one with this. And suddenly it's all about your world and you're all along in your boat. And if you'd look, he's in the stern. He's behind you. And you go, but he's sleeping. Nah. He's just wondering why you're not. He's just wondering why you're freaking out when he's just trying to get a nap. He's wondering why when he said we're going to the other side, you somehow don't believe him. Jesus is in the boat with you. In verse 40, it says, he says, why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? The Passion Translation says, haven't you learned to trust me yet? I asked God this question. I'm like, God, what's the right response in that situation? What should have they done? I mean, they're legitimately in trouble. They're legitimately in some bad situation here. What should have been their response? One would have been just hunker down. He said you're going to the other side. Just hold on. Like strap yourself in. One would have been, they've spoken to the storm themselves. Like we would say that today. Like they should have stood up and told the storm to be quiet themselves. They'd never seen that happen before. One should have been maybe woke him up a little sooner. But not go from like nothing to complete panic. But whatever the thing was, whatever they should have done, there shouldn't have been a fear-driven response. It shouldn't have been something that shaked every foundation they had. There should have been something different that changed within them. And that's what I'm trying to say is every situation that we deal with, they're all so different that it's hard to say, well, you should do this, this, and this, because that's not how that works with a relationship with God. Your situation with him may not be like their boat situation, and your situation may not be like your neighbor's situation, but each and every time, the wrong response is fear. The wrong response is to go, God, why don't you love me anymore? Every situation, it should be going, God, I'm going to tell you, I think the right response, in my personal theological opinion, would have been to wake him up. And if I'm ever in any situation, I'm going to press into God until I hear his voice. And I'm going to go, God, I don't hear you on this, but I'm still going after you. I don't hear you on this, but I trust that we're going to get through this thing. I'm going to remember what he told me. I'm going to remember he said, I'm taking you through this. It's funny the amount of times you hear missionaries talking about the times they faced death, but they knew they weren't supposed to die, so they weren't concerned about it. They knew that there was a promise beyond that, and so they could walk right through that. If he has a promise for you that he's told you haven't seen it yet, you got nothing to worry about. You can walk through that storm. Lastly, and this blows my mind, this last verse. Verse 1, and they feared exceedingly. They just saw Jesus stand up. Now, what's cool about this? In this passage, it looks like he said, "Peace be still," and then asked him the questions. In the other two Gospels, he stands up in the midst of the storm, and he says, "Why are you worried? Why are you afraid?" While it's blowing around them, he's going, "Why are you afraid?" But this, then when he calms the seas, it's amazing because he says this. He says, verse 41, they said, "And they feared exceedingly." I'm like, we're just talking about not being fearful. They get through this whole thing, and he says they were scared. This is the good fear. Why is this? Because these guys were learned, they understood some things, they knew their Bible. And when that sea got calm, they thought of Psalm 65 when it identified God as the one who stills the roaring of the seas and the roaring of their waves. They remembered Psalm 89:9 when the psalmist ascribed the praise to Yahweh, saying, "You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them." He remembered Psalm 93:4 when it said, "Mightier than the thunders of many waters, mightier than the waves of the sea, the Lord on high is mighty." They remembered Psalm 107:29 when it made this claim of Yahweh, "He made the storm be still and the waves of the sea were hushed." This was the moment they realized this wasn't a guy with some mad skills and some miracles, but we got Yahweh in the boat. If I have to go through a storm to get a revelation of Yahweh, take me through it. Take me through it. I want to know him, and whatever it takes to get an understanding of who he is, take me where you want to take me. There has to be something in us that wants to go deeper within him, that says, "God, I will find you wherever you are. If you want to sleep in the storm, I want to go with you." Oh, the God who talks on hillsides and carries little lambs, that's a great and awesome God. But a God that calms the storms, I want to know him too. It's one of the kids' books. I can't remember which one series it was, the C.S. Lewis, The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe. But it's the rabbit, and he's talking about Aslan. And he says, "Safe?" No one said he's safe. We serve a God that knew when they got in that boat, they were going through a storm. I'm going to tell you, God's going to take you through some storms. He's going to take you through some stuff that's going to scare the living daylights out of you. Because we don't serve a safe God. We serve a God that's concerned about his glory. We serve a God that wants to see you develop into what he's called you to be. And as much as it would be great to be developed into that on the shore, oftentimes it takes the roaring of the waves to get my attention. So God, take us through the storm. Chapter 5, verse 1. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. He told them they were going to the other side. They went to the other side. Whatever situation you're facing today, you're going to get through it. I hate to quote country songs, but it's fitting to say when you're going through hell, just keep on going. This is an interesting sermon because I was asking God, I'm like, man, I would say most people in here probably aren't dealing with a fearful thing right now. I'd say there's probably some. And he said to me, but everybody will deal with it at some point. You're going to face something that's going to scare you. If you're going to hang around Cross Life Church, you're going to face a lot of things that are going to scare you. As we dive deeper into what God's doing, as we go deeper into it, he's going to take us places we've never gone. He's going to call us to cross seas we've never crossed. And we're going to encounter storms we've never seen. What's funny is when they got on that boat, I guarantee you they weren't thinking about a storm. And it says, suddenly the winds came. It's the great thing about our fears is typically we don't get prepared for them. They come suddenly. But we serve a God who in the midst of your greatest fear has no problem taking a nap because he's not concerned about a thing. When you're facing it, I want you to look and see what God's doing. If he's not panicking, why are you? Your greatest fear doesn't cause God to stand up, doesn't cause God to fret or to worry. The word cancer doesn't scare God in the slightest. What did he say? He said, oh, death, where is your sting? Oh, Hades, where is your victory? I've already overcome. We're going through the storm, and we're getting on the other side. Stand up on your feet.